right, we are going. I am here with my friend that I'm meeting at least virtually for the first time now, Andrew Bailey. And Andrew, would you like to say a few words just to introduce yourself to the audience?
Certainly. Thanks, JP, for having me on. We've been Twitter buds for a while, so it's great to hang out with you over a video call. My name is Andrew Bailey. I'm a professor of philosophy at the National University of Singapore, and I teach classes and think and write about God, money, and people. And I think we'll probably talk today mostly about the first of those things, God. But if you want to talk about money and people, those are great topics too.
Yeah. That sounds great. And I want to touch on those, but yeah, it is your work on God and philosophy of religion that I've acquainted myself with the most, and that frankly has had a pretty significant impact on me. So really grateful to have an opportunity to actually ask you some questions here. Okay, so just diving in, I'll link to all the work here that I of yours that I mentioned, but you're the author among many other things of the excellent book, The Problem of Divine Personality. And so I have a cluster of questions that connect at least loosely to that book, some more directly than others. But to start off, first, I guess, would you mind saying anything about the origin of your own belief in God without like sharing personal details that would be uncomfortable? But are there, what was sort of your pathway to theism?
I was raised in a conservative Protestant home, and we church hopped significantly over the years from a conservative, charismatic, and a kind of wildly charismatic period of life to reformed and indeed truly reformed. So there's the BRs versus the TRs, barely reformed, truly reformed. We were in the truly reformed camp. And then I went to Yale University for college. And by the time I got there, I was less sure whether I believed in God or claimed to follow Christ or wanted to. But I found that in studying philosophy, especially at Biola, intellectual substance. And that kind of kept me around for a while, reading people like St. Anselm or St. Augustine, the greats of the Christian church, that made me think, you know what? There is something so thick and real here. I can't give up on it too easily. And then I went to the University of Notre Dame for my grad studies, again in philosophy. I had some significant religious experiences there connected to the Catholic Church, and I was called to the Catholic Church in some way or other in 2007. I didn't answer that call until 2017, where I was received into the Catholic Church. And that's where I am now, in some place of more or less uncomfortable equilibrium, where I try to learn more about what it is to be Catholic. I try to be serious about those commitments. But then nonetheless, you're a philosopher, you know this. We've always got doubts, we've always got questions, we've got these weird things that nobody else worries about except people like us, fellow weirdos. And so that's where I am these days.
And so just going off of that, do you find that those questions and worries that you have now maybe feel more contained than they used to, in the sense that they don't really like threaten the overall structure of your belief in the way that maybe they once did in the past?
Yeah, and I think this is an experience that philosophers are familiar with, that something can appear to be a devastating objection. For example, the problem of animal suffering, or more broadly, the problem of evil. And you dig in and you see that for every premise in one of those arguments against theism, they're decent enough answers. So then it's not quite clear what to do anymore.
Yeah.
And you kind of live in that zone. And I find myself blown hither and thither, especially in my teaching, because when I'm with students who are staunchly convinced, let's say, of the problem of evil and its soundness, I play the other side. And when I
Yeah.
get a bunch of Christian students in the classroom who just don't take it seriously, well, I have to play for the other team to get them to feel that there's a significant body of evidence against Christian theism and against theism more generally. So in terms of my day-to-day credences
Yeah.
and the evidential pressures that push them hither and thither, often it's sensitive to the people I'm around and the role I'm asked to play as a teacher.
Yeah. That's interesting. And maybe we can circle back to some questions sort of relating to that, but forging ahead here. So, like, I guess the impression that I've gotten from you is that you're someone for whom belief in God was not maybe primarily, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was not primarily the result of studying philosophical arguments. It seems like maybe it was more of a personal journey than that. You correct that if it's wrong, but either way, what
That's
I'm
about
interested.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
I do find arguments for and against the existence of God
Yeah.
really interesting. And there's
Yeah.
just so much good stuff to learn by studying those arguments. One gateway to philosophy for me very early on was St. Anselm's Proslogion and the ontological
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah.
And
We
I
have
found
this
it
in common,
so,
right?
so
Yeah.
maddening, but so cool.
Yeah.
And then you learn about modality, you learn about, okay, wait a minute. The argument looks like it has to be ridiculous, but it's
Mhm.
valid. So which premise must I deny?
Yeah.
And there are arguments for the key premises. Okay, which, if I wish to deny that, which premise of those arguments must I deny? And then you're off to the races, learning about metaphysics and logic and their intersection and so much more.
Yeah. So I feel like there are some interesting similarities between us, and oftentimes I feel like you're somebody who thinks about things very much like myself, probably much better, But one difference between us is that I really have been like an argument first
Mm.
person, So it's the arguments that have blown me around over the years, and that finally pushed me towards theism.
Was
But
there any one in particular that you think is the strongest and that has has been the most evidentially weighty for you?
Okay, yeah. So like you, I think it was the ontological argument that first gripped me. And I was, even as an undergrad, I think the way that this argument was presented to me, it was like, it was not presented, frankly, in a very sympathetic way. And yet I was
Right.
never happy with kind of the stock objections. I felt like there were pretty good responses to those objections. So that's the argument that was like always sort of gnawing at me, that was in the back of my mind. But then several years later, once I started teaching my own classes and really started to revisit the arguments for God, I became convinced that probably the best, the strongest, is the contingency argument. And I think that's
Mm.
still, of the classical arguments, that would still be my pick as the strongest. I'll turn that around on you, actually, because that's where I wanted to go next. Even though you're not really like an argument first theist, to coin a turn of phrase, which of the arguments do you think are the best, and which move you, if those are distinct questions?
There's an argument that I think is probably the strongest, especially to a contemporary audience, which is
Hmm.
the fine tuning argument. But there's another argument
Yeah.
that I find interesting for me and that I've never quite been able to reject, which is the argument that Descartes gives in Meditation 3 from the origin of the idea of God. Sometimes
Mm.
this is called a cosmological argument, sometimes an ontological argument.
Yeah.
Cosmological because it pertains to the causes of things,
Yeah.
ontological because the focal point is not a posteriori stuff we see in the world, but is instead just stuff you see in your own mind, namely the idea of absolute perfection. So the argument is often criticized on the grounds that Descartes himself, or at least the meditator, by the time the meditator gets to Meditation 3, doesn't have a right to the relevant premises of the argument. And then people get into this biographical stuff about, well, which Jesuit priest at La Flèche did Descartes learn the causal premise from? And why is he not entitled to it? But I'm more interested in whether the causal premise is true, and that's often missed in Descartes scholarship. So the premise is something like this. If you have a simple idea of something, that idea has a cause in reality, which ultimate cause has the property the idea expresses. So think about the idea of a unicorn. Does it follow that? So I have an idea of a unicorn. You do too. Does it follow that something has that idea? No, because it's a complex idea. It's a combination of horse plus horn, maybe some other things. But take a simple idea. You have this idea. Can you extract from that something has it or has the property the idea encodes? And Descartes argues yes. And then we have the idea of perfection or absolute perfection. Therefore, there is some absolutely perfect being. So this takes us into territories like whether the idea of God is complex or not, and whether that causal premise is true that if you trace things back far enough, you find something enjoying the properties had by our simple ideas, the properties expressed by our simple ideas. So it's a really simple argument.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
first encountered it, maybe I was a sophomore taking an early modern philosophy class.
yeah.
And I was just so frustrated with everybody pooping on the argument. Like, wait a minute, guys. I don't care whether Descartes is entitled to it by the time he gets to Meditation 3. I want to know if this is true.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for it. So maybe that's my
Yeah.
most uh, unusual view about a possibly sound argument for the existence of God, is that the argument widely thought to be the howler of the Meditations might not be so bad after all.
That's great. I'm really, yeah. So I'm really glad that I asked that question because I was not expecting that answer. Yeah, and like you, I mean, I first encountered this when I took history of modern philosophy, and then I was teaching history of modern last spring, and like so revisiting this argument for the upteenth time, and yeah, and I do recall kind of I didn't spend a lot of time with this thought, but I do recall having the thought while going over the material in class that I'm not really sure that this is such a bad argument after all. So, yeah, you've given me the
Can I give
motivation.
you my own spin on it, which I think makes
Please,
it
yeah,
even
please,
stronger?
please do, because now I'm going to go obsessive for this for a while anyway.
Well, so we could formulate the causal premise as Descartes does, that something has that property. There's a weaker version of the premise that we'll still do if we help ourselves to a few other resources, which is that if we have a simple idea, then possibly something has that property. Possibly. And then we combine it with resources of the modal ontological argument, and we've
Mhm.
thereby gotten a new argument for the possibility premise of the modal ontological argument. And this
Ooh,
deals with some counterexamples. So take some very specific color of blue, the missing shade of
the
blue.
missing shade of blue, right? Yeah.
Now, does it follow? So you have that idea, let's say maybe it is simple. Does it follow that something is that precise color, Pantone 755? I'm not sure. Okay, but does it follow that possibly something has that color? That seems much more compelling. So this weakened version of the causal principle looks to be strong enough, or it looks to be stronger than the stronger version, dialectically stronger. And you just need to add in the modal ontological argument stuff afterwards to get, therefore, possibly something is absolutely perfect. Therefore, necessarily, there is a absolutely perfect being.
That's really good. That's really clever. I like that. Have you written on this?
No, no,
Are
this is
you
just
okay?
stuff I
Okay.
teach.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, maybe you should. All right. Yeah, that's great. That was a great answer. Are there any other weird or favorite arguments that you have that you want to throw out there
There's one
for God?
that I find, let's say, heart compelling but not head compelling, which is the
Okay.
argument from Desire that C.S. Lewis gives
Hmm.
in a few places. In a line, it's that if you want something that you can't find in this world, then you're made for another world. And there is something that satisfies the desires of your heart not to be found in this world. That thing is God. So it's the lines of this argument go all the way back to St. Augustine. Our
To
hearts are
Augustine.
restless till they
Yeah.
rest in thee, that kind of
Yeah.
thought. And I'm not sure if I could actually defend this argument in a kind of
Yeah.
serious way, but when I read those lines from the what is it? The Surprised by Joy is one place where
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis develops this, and a few others. I feel it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a bit of affection for that, even if I'm not totally convinced that upon encountering the premises, somebody should increase their credence in theism.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that I agree with you that kind of argument gets at something. Because yeah, I mean, I do sort of see evidence of that in myself. For one thing, like what is it that has so long drawn me, to the God question? It seems like there is just like this sort of tug, yeah, a kind of restlessness, and I think I see it frankly in other people. Like I it can be yeah, like we might think at times it's ethically dubious to sort of impose this interpretation on other people's lives, and yet I think that many of us can look on the lives of other people and get the sense that they're kind of like chasing after God in a confused way, or they're missing God, they have a God-shaped hole or something like that. Seems like it's true.
Yeah, and you have to be careful with this kind of psychologizing because
Sure.
it's a
Yeah,
double-edged
yeah,
sword. And the
Yeah, for
Marxists
sure.
and Nietzscheans and
Exactly.
Freudians will turn it on you so fast. So be
That's
careful.
right. That's right. That's right. Although, like we do have the tu quoque when such people attempt to deconstruct theistic belief. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. In any case.
So it might
Okay.
come to a dialectical impasse there. They
Right.
say, my desire for God is a wish fulfillment and a
Yeah.
missing father figure. I say that it's a God-shaped hole in their heart, restless till they rest in thee.
Or
And
we
there
could,
may
yeah.
be an impasse there, a stalemate.
There could be where we could look for symmetry breakers.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, that was really great because I love this instinct to defend arguments that oftentimes philosophers are very hostile towards, as they are towards both of those.
Yeah, I get that vibe from your Twitter. You'll often throw out an argument just for fun,
That's
and
right. You
it's
understand
unclear
that,
whether you think it's sound or not. That's not
indeed.
the
Yeah,
point. The point is to, wait a minute, premise two, is this right or wrong?
yeah,
To
yeah.
actually figure
Exactly.
out, okay, it looks redonkulous, but why? And
Yeah.
that's how philosophy always begins.
Yep. Indeed. Okay. All right, great. Okay, so well, for a more terrestrial question here, I wanted to ask you something about what it was like studying, as I believe you did, under Plantinga, who was yeah, a major influence on me. I really admire Plantinga a lot. Yeah, so can you give us any gems about Alvin Plantinga and working with him?
He's a great man, in my
Yeah.
opinion, and a great philosopher, one of the greats of the 20th century. I took 6 classes with him. I spent hours every week in office hours, basically every bit of face time I could. No regrets about that. I have many other regrets about grad school, but spending all the time that I did with Mike Ray and with Al Plantinga, my two advisors, was the best choice I ever made. Al's a
Mm.
great man, and he he has fun doing philosophy.
It seems like it. Yeah.
There's a twinkle in his eye when somebody
Always. Yeah.
raises their hand, they've got an objection, and he's like ready to go.
Yeah, he's
And you
hilarious too. I mean, I've
he
never I
is,
never
he
met him,
is.
but I've listened to a lot of talks, and yeah, he's a very funny writer too. Um,
He's something of a saint, in my opinion, as
yeah,
well. There's maybe no one that I've known as well as I've known him that I haven't seen badly mess up ethically.
mm,
And that's a rare gem for someone to be clever but also wise and good and kind. Many people face trade-offs. The more wise they are, the less clever they are, or
mm,
there are these various properties that people can't seem to enjoy to a very, very high degree. But he had all these great making features to a very high degree. And sometimes he spoke with great wisdom and power into my own life, kind of like the Numenorians in Tolkien who are blessed with foresight. That's one of their powers.
yeah, yeah.
So, for example, he saw me smoking. I was a smoker at the time outside Coleman Morse, this building at Notre Dame. And he just walks up, Andrew, how old are you? 24, Uncle Al. Well, Andrew, when I was 24, I was a smoker, and I quit by the time I was 25. 25 is a good time to quit smoking. You should quit smoking by 25. Let me know when you've quit.
That's so great.
And he just said the thing I needed to hear. I just needed to have somebody who I accepted as an authority in my life tell me to knock it off. And he
Yeah,
told me
yeah,
to knock off a couple of other things in grad school as well. Uh, Plain spoken, but wise and gentle. And he just knew what to say, at least to me, to help me grow both as a philosopher, but as a human being too.
yeah. That's great to hear. It's always really nice to hear that somebody that you've admired from afar is actually great in person. And I've heard I think our mutual friend Josh Rasmussen say similar things about Plantinga. So
Yeah, Josh was one of the people who got me into philosophy.
okay.
In 2004, I was supposed to go to a class on Calvin. We had read the Institutes.
Mm,
But Josh and Luke Van Horn wanted to debate Calvinism in the cafe on campus instead.
that
And
sounds
I
like
skipped
Josh.
I skipped class on Calvinism to instead debate Calvinism with Josh and Luke and Chris Franklin, another Biola undergrad philosopher at the time. And we just talked for hours and hours. And that was one of the moments that the bug bit me. And I just knew not only should I be a philosophy major, but I should take this more seriously as maybe a path to take in life.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And Josh is somebody who's had a big influence on me. And now that he's moved to Texas, we're in person friends, which has
Oh,
been
great, great.
yeah, which has been a
Yeah, I think
great
it was a
thing.
great get for Baylor
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
secure
for
Josh.
sure.
There's probably no one better fit for that job.
My border collie Millie enjoys herding his mini children. It's entertainment for all of them. So,
Oh, great.
uh, okay, all right. So, your all right, your conception of God. Uh, yeah. So, how does your conception of God these days? I'm sure that it's evolved quite a bit over time. But how does it align first with classical theism, and then with the Abrahamic tradition? Can you just kind of like flesh out your model of God, how you think of God?
I think of God as an absolutely perfect being. Absolutely meaning to the limit if there's a limit, or if there is none. Uh, Perfect without boundaries or borders. And perfection is the simple feature by which the others are to be derived, if they're to be derived. So instead of thinking God or the concept of God as the combination of omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence, or something like that, it's more like God is maximally excellent, or maximally perfect, or absolutely perfect, from which the other features of God follow. So this is the constraint within which I try to theorize about God.
Okay.
And that's a big tent
Yeah,
constraint,
yeah,
but it does impose some borders. So one question we tried to think about in the Divine Personality book
yeah.
was where those borders lie and whether they permit a personally enriched view of God within them.
Yes. Okay, and good. So that's where I wanted to go next. So in what sense do you think we can say that God has a personality?
Do you have a personality, JP?
Some people have questioned that before, but I think so.
I think
I'll let
so.
others decide. Yeah. Okay.
I think there are peculiar things you like or dislike.
Hmm.
Some of them are general, some of them are specific in this sense. They pertain to particulars. Maybe they're particular people or colors or ideas that you're attracted to. Maybe you have a risk function. That is, you have a disposition when making decisions to discount or to give a premium to those possible outcomes that are low probability or high probability. Maybe you have dispositions with respect to how many people you want to be around you, or how
Hmm.
much you want to expose your inner self or your inner thought life to them, or when, or how. Maybe you have a liking for sons of Abraham, and so on. So I think we have a grip on what it is for an ordinary human being to have a personality. It's things like this. We have druthers. We have peculiar little quirks. Our minds are textured in this way, often quite uniquely. So one question we might have about God is, well, some say God is a person, others say God is personal, and yet others say God is tripersonal, one God in three persons. Could these persons be blessed as we are with personalities? So this is the central question of that little monograph. And this is how it differs from classical questions about personhood and God. It's not whether God has a mind or a will or an individual center of consciousness or three centers of consciousness, as have questions many of others have considered, especially with respect to the Trinity or just God more generally in other Abrahamic faiths. But whether God has a personality in that sense. And we could specify that as God has a personality just if God has enough of these quirks or internal psychological features to count. So you need to have enough of them to a high enough degree, and then God counts as having a personality. That's one of the main questions of this little book.
Okay. So great. When you ask if I have a personality, I'm a contingent being. I'm finite, right?
I just want to
And
hold up my visual aid here.
yes. Okay, great. And
There's the book. There we
I
go.
will link to the book. Yes. And I highly
You can
recommend it.
download it for free, by the way. On my website, I found the archive.org had archived
Uh,
Cambridge's free listing of the book when it was listed for free for a month, so you can download it legally and for free.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that.
Pardon the interruption. You were saying contingent being.
Yeah. So I can imagine that some people would, have the worry, especially people who are really, really committed to a strict understanding of the doctrine of divine simplicity, might have the worry that, like the more that we kind of fill out the notion that God has a personality, the farther we get from the idea of God as perfectly simple, unchanging, necessary, and so on. And so what would you say if you were to engage with, like a really strict type of Thomist who has this kind of concern?
I've been scolded by many Thomists in my time for failing to pay attention to the angelic doctor the right way.
Uh-huh.
They say things like this. Some of the most extreme ones say that God is not a being at all, and that it belongs to God not to be a being, but to give being to beings. Yeah. They say things like this.
Yeah. They really hate the idea that God is one being among others, right? That will set here on fire.
That's right. So on the one hand, they say things like that. On the other hand, follow them around for a while, and you'll also hear them saying things like this. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And they'll say God is just and God is merciful. They must have some strategy of reconciling these sentences. Mm-hmm. So my hope is to deploy whatever that reconciliation strategy is myself, to reconcile the personality sentences to which I'm friendly with the simplicity sentences. So if they think it could be true that God is not a being and that there is no thing that is God, mm-hmm. but that God is merciful and just, I would like to deploy that exact same strategy to say that God is simple, God is absolutely simple, maybe even there is no thing that is God. I wouldn't say that, in fact, but just suppose I wanted to. With sentences like, God the Father is less introverted than God the Spirit, and that Jesus has a different sense of humor than God the Father, and so on. Yeah. Attributions of personality to the three divine persons.
So that I think you just answered the question that I was about to ask, but to go ahead and ask it. So you're comfortable saying that the three divine persons in Christianity have distinct personalities? Is that right?
Yes. And one thing we invite readers to do is to test that hypothesis. How does God the Father like to be prayed to? How about God the Spirit or the Son? Has God the Father revealed himself to you in experience? How about God the Son? Are they different? And many Christian mystics have reported differences in how God likes to or prefers to reveal himself across the three persons. Now, that is not maybe public evidence, but it is private evidence that some of us may be able to access if indeed we can have vertical experiences as of communication with the Father or with the Son. And I don't mean to suggest that one can communicate one without in some way communicating with the others. But nonetheless, there could be a primacy of communication, whether one is primarily in communion with the Father or with the Son, in, let's say, a prayer to the Father rather than to the Son.
Yeah. And when we're not in philosopher mode and we're in like reading the scriptures mode, it does seem that like when Jesus is praying, that is strongly suggestive, at least, or friendly to the idea that these are in some respect distinct personalities if you're going to give a felicitous reading to those passages.
Maybe so. One place that I found inspiration in is C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. And there are a couple instances across those books where the Trinity shows up. One of the best is in A Horse and His Boy, where Shasta, do you know the story?
It's been a long time. Yeah.
Well, there's this cool passage where Shasta is encountering Aslan, God, mm-hmm. but he doesn't know yet what it is that's happening. And he says, "Who are you?" And he gets three answers. There's "I am me," and it's like this rumbling from the earth, the ground of being, that's the Father. And there's I am me, which is a soft breath as of a lion, a mammal, a living creature behind him, warm, wet, soft breath. And then there's I am me, the rustling of the leaves and the wind, that's the Spirit. So God discloses himself God discloses himself by way of Aslan, by way of this rumbling in the earth, and by way of the wind. Three different ways to Shasta. Could that be? Could it be that? So I'm not saying that the passage forces this interpretation, but this is one way of interpreting the passage: is that the three persons of the Trinity in the Chronicles of Narnia have different social dispositions, which we might call personality traits, how they wish to disclose themselves and how they do manifest to people on Middle Earth.
Right. Right. Okay, good. Yeah, that's helpful. I need to go revisit that. But okay, so does your thinking about divine personality, like does your particular view about how to understand God as having a personality, you think offer any kind of advantages in dealing with evil, broadly construed, arbitrariness, the badness in the world? Any sort of like unique insights or perspective that you think would be offered there?
Maybe the strongest example of this is one that is not original to me and my co-author, Brad Rettler, but instead derives from Mike Ray's thinking about the problem of divine silence. One hypothesis Mike has floated is that God is introverted. So there's a personality trait, and that this is the way to explain apparent divine silence. So he prefers silence over hiddenness. God isn't hiding, but God is distressingly silent. Maybe the way to think about that is that God, or at least one person in the Trinity, to some degree enjoys this personality trait of introversion. So Mike found his way to that view, and you could think of the divine personality view more generally as an abstraction of that, thinking about other traits as well. But maybe that's the best example of how you could use a trait, a particular trait that we're familiar with, and at least some people we know, to think about a problem of evil, or a problem, maybe not a problem of evil, but something in the neighborhood of a problem of evil.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I have to think about that more to decide whether I find it plausible, but that is a response to divine hiddenness that that hadn't occurred to me before. So that's really good. I also like the idea as somebody who has been categorized or labeled as introverted. I like the idea that I have this in common with God potentially. So I'll look forward to running that past some people.
Maybe you should run it past God, see what he thinks.
Introverts are more godlike. Okay.
In one respect, perhaps.
In one respect, yeah. Okay, good. What about arguments for God? Anything about your thinking about divine personality that impacts how you would think about any arguments for God, or that would perhaps strengthen any arguments for God by your lights? Is there any sort of connection there, you think?
I think so. One other trait to think about is playfulness, or a divine sense of humor. Suppose we had in hand the hypothesis that not only is there a mighty, perfect God on the loose, but that God is kind of a character, a bit of a weirdo with a sense of humor. What kind of world might God create? And what kind of things might God fine-tune that world to eventually result in? What kind of outcomes? Perhaps it's a world where there are such strange things as lobsters, or a million different species of beetles, or where weird coincidences or alleged coincidences regularly happen. This is a somewhat tongue-in-cheek example, but maybe it could be legit. Nominative determinism. Maybe you're familiar with this phenomenon where people live up to their names. So Doug Bowser became president of Nintendo America.
Right.
So there's lots of funny things and weird stuff that happens in our world.
Yeah.
Could it be that it's fine-tuned for that? That God made us and created causal mechanisms in the world, laws of nature, things that create the evolutionary forces that result in life and in diverse life as we see it, and so on, so that there would be funny stuff happening to delight us and to delight him.
Yeah.
So this puts a spin on all kinds of design arguments, including fine-tuning ones.
Yeah, that's really great. It does. Yeah, it does strike me that this helps potentially to explain, to give an answer to the question why this world, why this particular world. Yeah, like it's an expression of a particular personality, you might think.
This is an inference that we're often comfortable making in other cases of artifacts or things made by artists. We infer something about the personality from the quirks or the weird little features of the resulting artifact. So think of the cosmos as God's greatest artifact. What is it like? Is it quirky? Could we then infer? So this would not be an argument for the existence of God. It's more like an argument from the existence of God and the cosmos as it is to particular divine traits. But these might mutually work together depending where you are in the dialectic, whether it's bolstering or modifying an argument for the existence of God or something later down the chain where you've already got a God hypothesis in hand and you're trying to figure out what God is like.
Yeah, you're just trying to make this reality that we inhabit more comprehensible. Yeah.
That's right. And there's one explanatory puzzle here and an explanatory advantage. I think an explanatory advantage is that we want to, in general, have explanations, if there are to be any, bottom out in God. So that would seem to follow the right structure here if we're explaining the quirks of the cosmos, ultimately in terms of God's choices, which are then explained by God's traits or personality types. But there's a puzzle here too, which we could express as well, whence those traits. Are they necessary or contingent? Are they explained or unexplained? And these aren't quite the same question, but they're related. And there are theoretical choice points here for a divine personality theorist to take. They could say that God necessarily has the personality he does, which has some nice consequences and some not so nice ones. Or contingently, they could say that it is in turn explained, but then one wants to know explained by what? Or not, in which case one has a failure of at least one important version of the principle of sufficient reason. So there's some theoretical options here, costs and benefits, for someone who wants to accept this hypothesis of divine personality as an explanatory one for the quirks of the cosmos.
Yeah. Okay.
I myself am no friend of the principle of sufficient reason, so
I'm
totally comfortable embracing the contingent and unexplained even horns of these dilemmas, which many of my fellow theists find ridiculous because they really want the PSR to be true, because they really want to have an argument from contingency, for example.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. No. I mean, I'm guilty as charged there. Yes. I remember you telling me one time on Twitter that the principle of sufficient reason is toxic and absurd, or something to that effect. So.
Maybe I could borrow a phrase from another one of my teachers. It is not only false, it is also naughty.
Okay.
Maybe it's mischievous. Peter Van Wagen says this somewhere, that a certain doctrine of metaphysics is not only false but mischievous. I think that's the phrase he uses.
Okay. All right. We may have to just have a whole separate conversation in the future about the PSR, because I feel like the PSR has done a lot of work for me, like, moving towards theism. And I'd like to really hash this out at some point. But yeah. Okay.
It's sad, but it's false.
Okay. All right.
That's my view.
Well, I think that I do look to you as probably in most of these relevant respects an epistemic authority. So I'm going to have to bake that in.
Man. We're just a couple of philosophers trading intuitions. There are no authorities here.
Let's see. Okay. I wanted to just, this is my last question that's at least directly about divine personality stuff. Although I want to invite you to, say anything else that you're wanting to about that topic, but just to sort of tee you up, because I think I know what you're going to say here, but do you think that philosophy by itself is sufficient for understanding God and, understanding God's personality?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Maybe philosophy can uncover possibilities, and it can remove stumbling blocks to hypotheses or uncover new hypotheses for consideration. But the actual evidence has to come from experience, from tradition, from encountering God, whether in ritual, in more peculiar or individualized experience, in consulting scripture, in consulting authorities. And how to do this right will vary from tradition to tradition. So a faithful Jewish person will look to vindicate or falsify the hypothesis of divine personality differently than will a faithful Muslim, than will a faithful practitioner of the Baha'i faith or of Christian theism or some other monotheistic religion. So we're not in the business of giving peculiar advice or universal advice. We think that you'll need to find your own way within your own tradition, but that's probably the way you'll actually find evidence. It's not through abstract philosophical argument. This can show us the map, but it can't show us the route to take on the map.
That's a very ecumenical way of thinking about this. So I can certainly see the logic to that, but I can imagine somebody might have the reaction that, well, I hear this Andrew Bailey guy, is a committed Catholic, and yet you seem to be open to the idea that there are ways of accessing God by way of other traditions. Yeah. So what would you say in response to somebody who's sort of surprised by those ecumenical noises that you're making?
11 years ago, I taught a 2-week workshop on analytic theology in Istanbul, Turkey.
Mm.
And every student there was a devout Muslim cleric, a seminarian. Training.
Yeah.
In those 2 weeks, I discovered that these men were serious and faithful followers of God. And I don't mean of Allah with a not equal sign between Allah and God. I just mean God, the very God that I worship. And I found them to be curious and kind and good and intellectually serious. And that kind of changed the way I viewed not just other sects of Christianity to my own, but also other strands within the Abrahamic tradition, more broadly speaking. So this is not an argument for universalism or for inclusivism.
Or indifferentism.
It's more just, no, it's not that.
Yeah.
It's just that I have to take these people seriously, and I have to see that there's something good and true and beautiful in what they're up to.
And that's totally consistent.
That kind of changed me. It did.
Yeah.
Spending 2 weeks, and these were 8-hour days with me occasionally lecturing, but often just hanging out with these guys and seeing them live and seeing them wash and pray and converse and process philosophical theology together and with me. So that was an experience that changed me, and I can't unsee what I saw there. So I've since tried, when writing about God, to at least include little gifts to these distant cousins or brothers from another mother or whatever the familial relation is. It's a familial relation of some kind. To include gifts for them. And I was very gratified when someone wrote to me about my first book, Monotheism and Human Nature, and said, I want to translate this into Persian because there are a bunch of Islamic scholars in Iran who I want to read this because I think they could get something out of it. And I thought, oh, that's so cool. That means that I did learn something, and I've been able to say something that does speak to these people from a fork of my own tradition or a more distant relation.
Yeah, and it's best I can tell, not that I am an expert, but it sounds like this attitude is totally consistent with post-Vatican II Catholic theology, right? I mean, Vatican II was pretty explicit that God's activity is not limited just
That's right.
to Catholicism, right?
And I haven't said anything about soteriology here. This is more a comment about the character and minds of people I've known. And that it does seem to me that they do worship the one true God. They serve the same God I serve or claim to.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's great. That's I'm once again sort of struck by the degree to which your thinking about these things has been shaped by experience, by firsthand experience,
Well,
rather
what else
than
do we have to
just
go on? Are we going to
yeah.
base this on some random philosophy argument? I mean, this is a thin and frail reed to base actual belief on philosophy, especially
Yeah,
metaphysics.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think we get much thicker evidence in experience, but there's a trade-off. That kind of evidence tends to be less public. It's harder to
Hmm.
transmit to others.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Any other thoughts about divine personality before I move on to these handful of other kind of miscellaneous questions that I have?
Taste and see, the Lord is weird.
Okay. All right. Great.
A slogan we use in the book.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So you've got it. There's another book here that I have at least a couple of questions relating to, and that is Monotheism and Human Nature. So yeah, so I wanted to see what you have to say about this. Just to sort of set up the question a little bit. That yeah, a theistic worldview is oftentimes tied to a dualistic conception of the human person, right? Where you think, well, we're bodies plus immaterial souls. Probably a lot of people think that those two really just go hand in hand, and they'll think, well, the only people who think that we're just material beings are atheists, naturalists, materialists, those people. But the God people don't think that. And yet, you do, as I understand it, think that we're material beings, despite thinking, of course, that God exists and that God is not essentially a material being. And so, how do you square those two? I guess is the question. Um,
When I say we're wholly material beings, I mean things like this. First, I'll put it in common sense words, then I use fancy philosopher words.
okay.
I'm the sort of thing that you can see in the mirror.
Hmm.
When I look in the mirror, I'm not looking at something of which I'm a small part, say a brain, nor am I looking at something that I control as the ghost controls the machine,
Hmm.
nor am I looking at something that I'm related to by anything other than identity. What I see in the mirror, the organism living and breathing, about 183 centimeters tall, about 100 kgs, that guy in the mirror is nothing less than me. This is the beating heart of my materialism, is going to war with anybody who would deny that. So here's some people who would deny that. Brainists who think that I can't be seen because I am, strictly speaking, about 3 pounds, just a couple of
Mm-hmm.
kgs inside that skull, and that I'm not
Uh-huh.
about 6 feet tall, but instead I'm about 3.5 inches tall.
Hmm.
And that it's only in some derivative sense that I can be seen, but not in fact me that's seen. I'm seen by virtue of seeing something else.
Hmm.
And then there's substance dualists who say things like, well, I inhabit my body, I ensoul my body, I do these other things to my body, but I am not my body. I am instead a wholly immaterial thinking substance who's related in some way to that distinct item, my body. These are the views that I wish to go to war against. Now, there are other curious views where it's not quite clear how to classify them. For example, hylomorphism, which says that I am a soul, or I am a compound of body and soul, where the soul is the form of the
Right.
body.
I just tried to explain this in class today. I never
How'd it
explained
go?
hylomorphism. Well, that's the thing. I never explained hylomorphism in a way that like I'm happy with. So I'm anxious to see if you can help me out here. So far, this is what I said. Yeah.
Well, then we want to know about this relation of information, what it is for the soul to inform the body. Now, there are Catholic dogma that are relevant here. One says that man has two essential parts, body and soul, and the
Yeah.
other says the soul is the form of the body. So a bare bones kind of hylomorphism is a de fide dogma of the Catholic Church. And what I quoted, I believe, is the exact words from Ott's translation of the Latin dogma. So
Although it seems to me that like if I could probably interpret that. I think Thomas Bogardus it does so as just a substance dualist if you're sufficiently nuanced. Um,
I think you could interpret it as a substance dualist kind of thing or as a materialist kind of
Okay.
thing. It
Okay.
depends on what this relation of information is, and it
Yeah.
depends on what kind of thing a thing must be in order to play the form role as opposed to the matter role in that
Hmm.
hylomorphic compound. So there's tricky stuff here. Maybe this isn't the place to work out the technical details,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'll just boldly assert something that a robust materialism is compatible with this bare bones hylomorphism. And if you want to read more, you can. I've said a bunch of stuff about that, not about the hylomorphism part, but the
Yeah. Yeah.
materialist stuff.
Yeah.
That's more or less my view. It starts with common sense and tries to stick to that and deny anybody who would try to go to war with those bits of common sense. Things like I can see myself in the mirror.
Are you a panpsychist?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. Okay.
But
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, someone pulled me in the direction of panpsychism or pan-protopsychism or something like that in a
Okay.
way that I'd never been pulled before. This was in conversation with Dean Zimmerman, and the idea was every created thing to some extent resembles God. Okay, suppose so. Take the lowly electron. In what way might the electron resemble God? Well, it has some degree of existence, and it has powers of
Yeah.
repelling electrons, of doing things negatively charged stuff do. In what way is that power like God? Well, it's like God in that God has powers, so the electron has powers too. But maybe we want something more specific. We want more thickness to the resemblance, something substantive. Well, perhaps electrons wish to repel or to attract.
Mhm.
And perhaps they resemble God purposively or wish-wisedly. And that just as God is purposive and has aims and achieves them and desires things or doesn't desire others, that is the more specific or thick respect in which even fundamental fields, particles, forces, building blocks of the material world might be said to resemble God. But then,
Yeah.
if the electron wants stuff or doesn't want stuff, that sounds like we're marching towards, if not panpsychism, maybe pan-protopsychism, where there's proto-intentionality or proto-thought or something like thought, even at the smallest level.
Yeah. Good.
So if you wanted to make me be a panpsychist of some sort, that might be those are the first steps of the forced march.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, as people who know me will know, I have, I'm not a panpsychist. I have a lot of sympathy for the view because I spent all these years studying under Galen Strawson, and so like I know the arguments for and against.
So is it the stuffing argument that gets you?
What are you calling the stuffing argument?
There must be intrinsic character to these physical things, not merely extrinsic relations. That intrinsic character is phenomenal.
So what I think is that what I think panpsychists are absolutely right about is that physics just doesn't settle the nature of matter. That's a further question. Like maybe matter has no phenomenal properties at all, but physics just doesn't tell us one way or the other. And I think that non-panpsychists tend to not get that point, and so I tend to be very sympathetic to panpsychists, at least there, even if I'm not sure if they're right that matter is has phenomenal properties. The thought has also, I know this is not a thought Galen would have, but the thought has also occurred to me that I think I've tweeted something to this effect that you liked, actually, that maybe the truth of panpsychism would increase the probability of theism, because it would mean that matter has a kind of value that you might think makes more sense on theism, right? That God is going to want to infuse value. It's sort of like what you're just saying, that God's going to want to spread value, as far and wide as possible. And how can you make matter valuable? Well, give it consciousness, or proto-consciousness or something like that.
There's a song some will regard as cheesy, but I'll report liking it. It's
I
called
like
God.
Things.
Well, it's called God Believes in You. And one of the lines in the chorus is, everything matters if anything matters at all. And I think about that when I think about this hypothesis you're floating, which is that there's some degree of value in every little thing at all. What might that be? Well, the best candidates for things that are intrinsically valuable, many of them are mental items. They're pleasures and loves and friendships and things beholding beauty and so on. So if it really is the case that everything matters, everything has this degree of value, maybe there's another way to bootstrap yourself into mentality everywhere.
Yeah.
That is panpsychism.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got to just float this past you, especially since I was talking about the argument from universals today in my philosophy of mind class. So, I think even if I were convinced that like some version of panpsychism is true, I would still I think lean towards some sort of dualism, because I think there's a pretty good argument for dualism from universals. So we have access to these universal properties. I think those have to be cashed out non-physically, and that to come into relation with them, we ourselves also need to be either non-physical or have some non-physical aspect to ourselves. And so does this worry you at all, given that you think we're just material beings? Do the universals keep you up at night?
JP, not one bit. And here's why. I don't think the divide between us and the universals, or between the material world and universals, is properly thought of as divide between the material and the immaterial. Instead, it's the concrete and the abstract. And immaterial thinking things are on the concrete side. They engage in causal relations. Gods, angels, demons, Cartesian souls, if there are such things. And if there is a problem of causal commerce between us and universals, you don't solve that problem by saying we're immaterial, because we're still on the causally efficacious side of that great divide. And the universals are on the other side. They're on the abstract, non-causally efficacious side of the divide. Now, some views of the metaphysics of universals would say universals are immanent and in things and causally efficacious. These are more Aristotelian-ish views than Plato-ish views. And I think those views are false. So if there are universals, which there are, they're Platonic universals. And if there's a problem of commerce with them or getting into contact with them, you don't solve it one bit by saying anything about our nature, as long as we're still concrete. So you could say we're material or immaterial or something else. As long as we're concrete, we're on the wrong side of the divide to actually get in touch with those things. And God is too, by the way, because God is concrete. God has causal powers. So if there's a problem here, it's a problem for everyone, including Almighty God.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. I'll have to think about that some more. Have you, just as an aside, have you yet had a chance to read Ed Feser's new book, arguing for the immateriality of the soul, at least in part from universals?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I saw that it existed.
Yeah.
I don't have a copy, and I haven't looked at it yet.
Okay. All right.
Let me know if it's good. If you say to read it, I'll read it. Otherwise, probably not.
It's coming up on my list here. So yeah, I'll be back in touch about that. Okay. All right. Anything else on human nature where your materialism, or your material conception of the human person that you want to clarify or get out there?
No.
Okay.
I've written enough about this. I've said most of what I want to say. I have one more little book coming out about this, then I think I'm done.
Okay.
Okay. You could read what I've said if people want to know what I have to say.
Yeah. I'm very intrigued. I am very intrigued by this, because my movement towards theism was also a movement towards some kind of dualism, and then here you come along, committed theist, telling me that I'm a material being after all. So this is a fun challenge for me.
And some of my friends, good friends, long-time close friends in philosophy, who are fellow travelers and serious theists, think it's a grave error to reject substance dualism, and that substance dualism is obligatory. My view is that it is not obligatory.
I think you're right.
It's an open possibility that we shouldn't rule out as a matter of, let's say, Christian orthodoxy or some other kind of orthodoxy.
Yeah, and I know you're not exactly in the apologetics business, but if you were, it would be a valuable contribution to that project, I suppose, from your perspective, to show that, look, even if you're convinced that you're just a material being, that's not a reason that you can't be a theist or specifically a Christian. Yeah.
That's right. I think apologists often shoot themselves in the foot by saddling their religious views with far too many commitments.
Yeah, I
For
agree with you
example,
about
Christian
that for sure.
apologists who reject our best scientific theories and then are
Yes.
frustrated when people believe them.
Yeah.
That Christianity entails the rejection of our best scientific
Yeah.
theories, and on that basis reject Christian theism.
Yeah.
My brother in Christ, there's a far
Yeah.
easier path to take. Take it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, yeah. To go a little bit autobiographical, I was around a lot of young Earth creationists in my teens who were very adamant that if you don't accept young Earth creationism, then you've got to just kind of ditch Christianity altogether. And all I can say is that did not increase the plausibility of Christianity in my eyes, and it took a long time to undo that work.
Yeah, that's a path for losers.
No. Okay. All right. So,
said tongue in cheek.
Yes. So speaking of other obstacles to specifically Christian belief, not broadly theistic belief, one for me, and I know one for plenty of people, is the doctrine of hell, or at least the way that the doctrine of hell is oftentimes cashed out is entailing that at least much of humanity, some of humanity, maybe most of humanity, is not only going to go to hell, but it's going to go to hell forever, and there is no escape. That by some of our lights just serves to really radically undercut the plausibility, the moral plausibility and the metaphysical plausibility of Christianity. And in discovering that some forms of universalism are an option for Christians was a kind of game changer for me in starting to reconsider Christianity seriously some years ago.
Where did you first encounter that?
First encounter universalism?
Universalism, yeah.
I guess I was aware that it was a view going back a long ways, but my impression was that it was so widely regarded as a heresy that I thought that it didn't really help, because basically, like, to be a universalist Christian was to be a fake Christian. That's how I thought about it until maybe my mid to late 20s, when I was armed with enough knowledge that I could see that wasn't the case. So honestly, I think I came across some Plantinga clip from I don't know, some interview that he had done years ago, where he was making at least some friendly noises about universalism, and I had long ago filed away Plantinga as a serious Christian thinker, and I was like, okay, well, if Plantinga is at least open to some kind of universalism, then these people who are saying that that's just fake Christianity must be wrong. And then from there, I was kind of off to the races. Okay, so that's all just by way of setup to say that you've defended the. I'll let you characterize your own position, but you've defended the idea that some version of universalism is defensible, that it's indeed defensible within Catholicism, which is that's trickier, because lots of Catholics are really hostile to universalism. So can you just explain what's the version of universalism that you find to be plausible, and how do you defend it?
Think about the best thing that could happen to you, JP, and just assume Christian theism is true. It's that you're received the way the prodigal son is received, and you'll live in the house of the Lord forever. That's a very good outcome. That is the best possible outcome for created being, to rest in the Lord, to have eternal joy, eternal bliss, eternal communion with God and with anyone else who's in that happy state. So that's the best for you. Well, what is the best, period? Well, it's for everybody to have that happy outcome, that we should all live in the house of the Lord forever. Now, when we look at a scenario that is so overwhelmingly valuable and good, I think that our disposition towards it should be a little different than it is towards many other hypotheses in philosophy, religion, or metaphysics. Towards many other hypotheses, I don't think we should have much affective reaction or much by way of feeling or hope or derision or dislike or like or anything like that. So for example, we're debating Platonism about numbers. We probably shouldn't have very strong feelings about it, and very little
Yeah.
hangs in terms of
Yeah.
the ultimate value of all that is. Very
Right.
little hangs on it. Let's be real.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But when it comes to your eternal status and the eternal status of all, and this possible, or this out possible, I'm not going to call it possible yet. Let's just say this outcome, which is the best of all outcomes. Okay, we not only will we have strong feelings about it, but we should.
Yeah.
We should hope it's true. And
I like the should there. So yeah. So not to interrupt, but do you think that there would be something morally problematic about not having that attitude at all?
I'm not sure about morally, but I
Mhm.
think there might be other dimensions in which it's just not apt. Now,
Mhm.
there's sometimes outcomes that are very good for us or just good overall, where we are not reasonable in hoping for them to be true. Let's say a lotto ticket. The less probable it is that you win, the less reasonable your hope is. Or let's say that you know that you've lost, in which case, no reasonable hope. Or let's say it's not actually a possibility, and you know that it's not a possibility, then no reasonable hope. But let's say there's a sliver of chance. One thing that my co-author and I, Brad Rettler, in this Universalism paper argue is that hope is a kind of multiplier. If we've cast aside barriers to accepting universalism and set up its possibility, we should, and then we have this huge magnitude of goodness. We really stack the deck on that one. We should hope that it's true. And hope is a kind of multiplier in our intellectual endeavors that should cause us to change our inquiring behavior. So for example, when we're looking at the evidence for the hypothesis hoped for,
Mhm.
we should look harder and more thoroughly and carefully, and dare I say it, more hopefully, more optimistically, provided that some of these other conditions are in place. So it's not just that it's really nice if it happened. You need to have some other conditions in place for permissibility of hope. But then hope will change the way you inquire. It'll also make you more suspicious of contrary hypotheses and of contrary evidence. So with this background of hope and reasonable hope, and hope as an intellectual multiplier that pushes us in one direction or other in our inquiry, let's return to metaphysics, this recherche, abstract, kind of weird thing that we do, where we talk about counterfactuals of creaturely freedom and what is possible and not, and what kinds of things are compatible with various divine omniproperties and so on. Well, we should be more friendly even to the most strange of metaphysical hypotheses that confirm universalism. So then the other move we make in this paper is to float some of those hypotheses. One of them is a version of Molinism, or taking a few elements of the doctrines of Molinism and applying them to universalism. The rough idea is this, that what counts towards salvation is not just what you do, but what you would have done. And God, knowing what instantiations of creaturely essences would have done, selects those creaturely essences that have the right counterfactual profile to in fact be saved, despite what they do, because salvation is in part allocated based not only on what one does, but what one would have done.
Hmm.
So you might say, quite rightly, this is a dubious metaphysical strategy deploying or building on a dubious foundation, the doctrines of Molinism, and then adding speculative
I find
metaphysical.
Molinism plausible, but
Let's just grant it.
yeah.
Grant that it's a dubious foundation, and then build some speculative metaphysical hypotheses on top of it about what kinds of creaturely essences there are and what their instantiations would have done. So not only is it a doctrine about what God knows and the order of God's knowing, but in fact, the pattern of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom that in fact is instantiated in the world. And the result is that universalism is true. And we don't straightforwardly defend the truth of the premises in this argument, though we try to knock off the obvious objections to them, but say that if you've adopted this hopeful stance, then you should be more friendly to the premises, give them a boost in your credence, which means giving a boost ultimately to the credence in the conclusion, universalism.
On your version of universalism, does this just mean that everybody is immediately like beamed up to heaven upon death?
No.
Yeah.
Ours doesn't speak to the mechanism of salvation, but instead just the truth of universal salvation. So there may be various possible theories, possible theories of the mechanism of salvation. And I mean soteriology broadly speaking. So across the Arminian to Calvinist to Catholic spectrum, and including various subcategories, as well as maybe more contemporary weird theories about second chances, or about the way purgatory works, that hell is only temporary, and so on. Our argument is compatible with a wide range of those. Or you could be agnostic. You just think that there's a given outcome, and you don't know what mechanisms God uses to assure the outcome, but you have an argument for that outcome.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess what I'm trying to sort of draw out there for the benefit of others is that on a sophisticated and nuanced version of universalism, one could be entirely open to the possibility that most people have quite a long sojourn in hell right before achieving ultimate salvation, right? Hitler might be in hell for a few billion years or something, and that all the universalists, as I understand it, is committed to thinking is that there is at least a potential pathway for even the worst of the worst to eventually achieve salvation. Is that correct? Am I wrong about anything there?
It sounds about right.
Yeah.
One point of inspiration for us was this little story we found about a possible but unrealized outcome in which Judas repented after betraying Christ. And we quote that in the paper and reflect a bit about what that would mean and what it would be like if that was true, not just of Judas, but every one of us who's ever done wrong, which is all of us, except maybe there's a few exceptions on the fringes, but more or less all of us. And what a beautiful and valuable story that would be, and how we should long for it and rationally hope for it to be true. So I commend, if you read nothing else in the paper, read that little paragraph about this would-be Saint Judas and what that might mean.
Yes, I endorse that. I found that very helpful. And what about the allegation that universalism is actually a formal heresy on Catholicism specifically?
I think we need to take that line by line. That is, there are various versions of the charge, and some of them more credible than others. But here's my experience. The closer you look, the more you find wiggle room, sometimes surprisingly. So here's a line from the Athanasian Creed. I'm just going to pull up the paper and read it exactly. And they that have done good shall go into life everlasting, and they that have done evil into everlasting fire. This is the Catholic faith, which except a man believe faithfully, he cannot be saved. Sounds stern, sounds non-universalist, sounds important for anybody who hopes to be faithful to the Catholic tradition. But let's look more closely. They that have done evil into everlasting fire. So I interpret this as all F's are G's. That is, all those who have done evil have also enjoyed or suffered in this other condition, everlasting fire. Look closely. It says all F's are G's. Does it say that there are indeed some F's? It does not. Now, if you accept Aristotelian categorical logic, all F's are G's implies strictly that there are some F's. Under logic's developed sense, basically any other kind of logic, that is not a valid inference. Now, it may well be that the authors of the Athanasian Creed presupposes presupposed categorical Aristotelian logic. Probably
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
But they didn't say that.
Yeah. And
It
the
is
creed is the creed, apart from what
the,
was going through their brains at the time, right? So yeah.
that's right. So take a kind of the analog of originalism in constitutional interpretation. Take that
Yeah.
here, where what
Yeah.
the text means is not what it was in the intended meaning, but rather the proper interpretation of the text is its public meaning, its actual meaning at the time of writing. So again, not intent, but actual meaning at the time of writing.
Yeah.
And that is not, it's not fixed by this random presupposition they may have had of Aristotelian categorical logic. So here's my experience. We look closely at these little statements, the ones that appear most damning, unintended,
Yeah.
and there's wiggle room. Here's another example, not from the Catholic tradition, but from the Calvinist one. Calvinists have the TULIP, T-U-L-I-P, the 5 doctrines of grace. L, limited atonement. And they like to emphasize this when doing battle with Universalists, that the atoning power of Christ's sacrifice is limited to the elect. Now, this is compatible with Universalism if we just add this little extra premise. All are elect. So yes, the power, the atoning power of Christ's sacrifice is limited. It applies only to those who are elect. And all are elect. All have been selected by God for salvation. So from that little L, it does not follow that universalism is false, if you look closely. So here's the formula. Anytime somebody tells you you're a heretic for being a hopeful universalist or being a universalist proper, look closely, and you will, I predict, often, maybe always find enough wiggle room, at least to my satisfaction, to think that this is permissible to assign some high credence, maybe even outright belief.
Yeah. Okay. This is great. This is gold. One more on hell, if you don't mind. A line that I've heard a number of times actually from Ed Fazer, whom I greatly admire, I should say. And it's had a big influence on shaping my thought. But he says that, well, look, it's kind of crazy for a Catholic to be a universalist, if only because we know that the demons are in hell forever, right? Like that's totally clear. There's no hope for them. So we know that that like Pope Francis's hope that hell is. He says he likes to think of hell as being empty. Fazer will say, well, that's ridiculous because we know hell's not empty. The demons are there and they're always going to be there. Yeah. So what about that? Is it the case that there's no hope for the demons? Or
The other classic example here is also Judas. If hell is to be eternally populated and there's at least one human person there, some
better
say
that he had never been born, right?
That's right. Some say Judas is on the list. Yeah. I don't have the text in front of me, so I can't give you the judo, but I predict there's some judo to be done on these
and of course,
dogmatics.
Catholics don't read the Bible, right? I'm kidding.
Well, Catholics don't read the dogma either, or they read it and they don't think about how to. Yeah, I know. So I don't have ready to hand the dogmatic sentences.
Yeah.
But then here's the other category to pay attention to when somebody's trying to press this move on you. Look at the status of the sentence itself. So there are various levels of dogmatic authority, from de fide down to theologia sententia, and then there's those are like theological. So there's of the faith, de fide. There's theological sentences, which maybe it's something like more likely than not taught by the church, but less mandatory. And then there are things that are thought but not taught, and there's a Latin term for that too. So there's grades of mandatoriness, and you can't let somebody bully you into accepting something without any recourse unless it's de fide. You have options otherwise. And then if it's de fide, here's the second piece of the recipe. Look closely. You can often find wiggle room. And in fact, there often are minority reports within the church's history about a wide range of issues. And some of those minority reports are popes. So must one be more Catholic than the Pope? I submit not.
Sorry, I don't mean to. If this is out of left field, I don't mean to catch you off guard. But yeah, I do. what do you think of Origen? I hear people sometimes say that Origen was a heretic, but others say no, he was unfairly maligned. Yeah, do you have a view about this? About
I mean,
how
he seems like a
Catholics should
cool
think of
guy, but
Origen? He seems like a cool guy to me too.
I don't have strong views beyond that.
Okay, all right,
Last time I looked at a page of Origin, I was probably 20 years old. That was
okay.
a long time ago.
Okay, I can't say that I've read much of Origin, but I have him on my radar as a really like incredible thinker who
Yeah,
seems to have been, kind of like universalism friendly, and he annoys lots of people, which increases my interest. So
I understand.
okay, all right, okay. Last few here, you've been generous with your time. I don't want to keep you too long, but prayer. Um, so I've always just confession that, I mean, I've always kind of struggled with prayer. There's it can feel it can feel very strange. Like what am I doing in praying? I very rarely, if ever, like have the experience, of like being efficacious in prayer. So maybe you can help me here. Do you have thoughts to share about what is prayer? What's its purpose? What can it do? Why should theists? Why should Christians specifically pray? What is this act that's so core to religious life?
The best thoughts I've ever had on this matter are not my own. They are instead Eleanor Stump's.
She's
There's a
had some good
paper,
ones.
yeah, maybe you know the paper, Petitionary Prayer, APQ
Yeah.
79 or so. I could regurgitate the paper, but maybe the best thing I can say is go read that paper. Eleanor wrote this when she
Mm,
was a graduate student at Cornell in the
mm.
70s. But
I
there's
did not know that.
tremendous, well, there's tremendous wisdom encoded in this paper. And if you know Eleanor Stump, maybe you're not surprised. But if you don't know her, you might be surprised to know that a paper so wise and good and well crafted was written by a graduate student. But it was.
Hmm.
It's the best thing written on prayer in a good long while, maybe since St. Anselm or something. So
Wow,
maybe the best thing I can say is just go read Eleanor Stump's paper, Petitionary
that's
Prayer.
great. Yeah, that's a ringing endorsement. Okay, so yeah, I'll be sure to link to that in the notes for people.
Do you want me to give
Okay.
the two sentence version?
If you feel like it, sure. Yeah.
When less powerful people are relating or in relationship with more powerful people, there are two dangers or extremes into which we might fall, vices on either end. It could be that the powerful person on the side of the relationship is very indulgent, just gives them everything they want.
Hmm.
Or it could be that, on the other hand, that there's a kind of dominance, that we don't really have desires of our own, and it's not as though every whim is acceded to by the father, by the prime minister, by this more powerful person, but instead they select for us and micromanage our lives. These are both vicious extremes. How could we design a relationship with a being so much more perfect than we are and so unlike us in so many ways? What is the causal mechanism and what are the rules of relating that would help us avoid these extremes? Well, here is one rule we might follow. You ask for stuff, and sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. So think about a parent-child relationship, neither fully indulging, always giving, or giving in to the desires of the child, nor dominating the child and deciding everything for them, somewhere in between. And we're mediated by this institution of prayer. So Stump argues that prayer serves this role when done right and helps us relate to God in a healthy way, neither being dominated nor dominating.
That's great. And
That was more than two
yeah,
sentences. But
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
great paper, and she situates this with respect to a classic passage in St. Thomas and a bunch of other stuff. Great paper. It teaches well too. I recommend
Awesome.
it as wise, but also great for classroom use.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. And that is incredible that she wrote that in grad school. I was not doing things like that in grad school.
Same.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out how to stop smoking, for example.
Yeah, maybe this is what I got. Like I should have started graduate school smoking so that I could then stop it.
There would be some good in that and some evil.
Okay. Yeah, I ran a lot in grad school. I ran a lot of marathons in grad school. Didn't write enough papers, but those are my personal problems. Okay. So you can you can sort of pass on this to the extent that you want or not. But I was curious if you wanted to say anything publicly about what it is that ended up leading you to Catholicism specifically, given that that's not where you started. And I know that there are elements of this that were personal, and so don't share deeply personal things that you don't want to. But are there things that you would be happy, for a general audience to be aware of?
Maybe not too much.
Yeah,
I had for the first time in my life experiences of the Catholic Church, of its rituals, of the rhythm, of the liturgical service, but also the year.
yeah,
And I encountered God in those experiences. And one of my friends who was important to me in that was Richard Kim, a fellow PhD student with me at Notre Dame at the time. And then another friend, Tim Paul, who teaches at University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis, St. Paul. But beyond that, maybe I'll keep that to myself, or we'll share that over a beer, JP. Maybe you can
yep,
tell me more about yours. But that's
yep,
what I'll
fair.
say on the
Yeah,
record.
yeah, sounds good. And that's interesting. I'm always interested in the people who just like argue their way into read their way or argue their way into the faith, and those for whom it's much more of a personal journey. And it seems like you're much more in the latter camp.
Yeah,
Um,
and Notre Dame was an important part of that for me. I love
yeah.
Notre Dame. The background on my phone for
Oh wow.
over 10
Okay.
years now has been the Golden Dome. It's
Yeah.
an important place to me.
Yeah. And I've heard there's some Catholics there. Yeah.
There are a few.
Um, a more substantive question that really does interest me a lot, and maybe I will set this up a little bit because, yeah, I've spent a lot of time wrestling with this. Okay, so here's how I'd like to set this up. I mean, the general question is why Catholicism rather than what you've called woo-woo deism, woo-woo deism, woo-woo deism, or what I might just call bare theism. So here's how I want to sort of motivate this, or the sort of presenting it as a challenge. I, it occurred to me over years. I'm somebody who's not. I'm trying to change this now. I've not produced a lot, but boy, I've read a lot and listened to a lot, and I've been really engaged with the God debate over the course of a lot of years. And there came a point where I really started to feel like, okay, the God people seem to have an explanatory advantage over the atheists. Like it just down the list. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there a fine? Why is there a fine-tuned universe? Why is there consciousness? Why do we have moral knowledge? And why is there psychophysical harmony? Why is there creaturely freedom? Blah blah blah. Right? And there's just like all this stuff that theism
It's a very long
seems.
list.
It's a very
I
long
sense that
list.
you could keep on going.
I could indeed keep on going. Yeah, that's right. There's just a lot that theism seems to explain, and atheism, frankly, seems to explain two things: evil and hiddenness. If you insist on, categorizing hiddenness as like its own thing. But with respect to the other stuff, you just all that you're going to get from the atheist, even the really brilliant, sophisticated ones like Graham Oppy, for whom I have endless respect. But it's going to bottom out in brute facts. Either brute necessities or brute contingencies. And I'm always left wondering, okay, but why? And so the theists really seem to have a kind of question stopper, whereas the atheists don't. Okay, great. Now, so if we're just compare, as Aki says, compare the theories. Like we compare bare theism, we compare that to atheism, and bare theism really seems to do better overall, I would say. Okay, now, however, not a lot of people actually do defend bare theism, like in real life. They might in the context of a debate, but what they defend is a broader theological picture that has a whole lot more than God in it, right? And so you've got, angels and demons and more problematically than that, from a theoretical perspective, you've got texts that are very hard to make sense of, right? And so like in Christianity, you've got a lot of stuff in the Bible that runs kind of, that seems at face value to run contrary to common sense, to moral sense, to what our best science tells us. And so you start to pile all that stuff on to this nice, tidy theistic hypothesis. And sometimes I had the thought, wait, why are you doing this to yourself, right? Like you started off with this really nice, clean theory, and then you piled on a bunch of auxiliary hypotheses that really lowered its probability. Okay, and so that's the challenge I want to press. Why do that? Why do you find that Catholicism specifically, is more plausible than just the bare theistic hypothesis?
I have an abstract Bayesian reply, and then maybe something more specific to the case.
Okay.
The abstract reply is that we often face a trade-off in theory building or hypothesis selection between prior probability and posterior probability on the evidence. And you can boost the latter at the cost of the former. And what you want to do is do it at an attractive ratio. That is, boost the latter more than you're depleting the former. So the question is, when we're adding hypotheses to theism, so we have theism and we're adding auxiliary hypotheses to it, we apply the product rule to derive its prior probability, which is you take, for independent hypotheses, take the prior probability of one, multiply it by the other. As long as either of them is less than one, the result will be lower than the prior probability of any of them individually. So just suppose these are independent. So you're driving down the prior every time you add a new auxiliary hypothesis. True. But you can explain more stuff. That is, in Bayesian terms, you drive up the posterior. That is the conditional probability of the hypothesis on the stuff we know. You're able to explain more. And the Bayes theorem tells us how these relate and how they relate to that other key conditional probability, not the conditional probability of the hypothesis and the stuff known, but the stuff known on the hypothesis. So we use Bayes' theorem to compute the relationship between these things. And what you want is an attractive trade-off. So the question is, can adding auxiliary hypotheses to bare theism boost its ability to explain the stuff we see? Let's say that we add to the hypothesis of theism the hypothesis that human beings are fallen creatures who are likely to go wrong epistemically, morally, and otherwise. Does this help us better explain why some of us are unable to get in touch with God? That is why to us God is hidden. Seems so. Does this help us better explain the existence of suffering in the world? Seems so. Mm-hmm. We do fucked up stuff to each other and to ourselves.
Yeah.
And in fact, adding that hypothesis to bare theism means that when you observe suffering in the world, it doesn't disconfirm theism, it confirms it. When you see disagreement or widespread unreliable processes being used to generate beliefs about theism or its denial, the joint hypothesis is confirmed, not disconfirmed. So there's an example of the trade-off being a really good one. You add this stuff to bare theism about human nature and its relationship to God and fallenness and all that, and all of a sudden, the stuff that looks like it might disconfirm bare theism confirms enriched theism. So that's the abstract strategy you want to follow when building up an enriched theism. Does Catholicism or Catholic dogma, or maybe even a select portion of Catholic dogma, the De Fide dogma, optimally select for those things which, when enriched or when added to theism to enrich it, boost its explanatory power more than they deplete its prior probabilities? I'm not sure about that. Maybe in total, yes, but maybe there are cases where it works the other way. You have to take them case by case. But let me give you a more human answer that relates to the life of the church and what Catholics actually do and like who we actually are. Mm-hmm. Suppose there is a God, a great being who cares about us, who's perfect, who knows all. It'd be good to get in touch with God somehow, it seems. How? Do we just make it up? Or can we find help through institutions, through collaborations, through wisdom passed down over the ages, through processes that wise people have tried themselves and that have helped them? Can we bootstrap on their testimony? Life in the Catholic Church is that at scale. It's where you are given a list of things to say in order and a list of things to do in order. Suppose you feel guilty because you've gone wrong. You've really messed up. What do you do? And suppose that you believe there's God, you believe that reconciling to God and somehow is going to make you feel better and part of the correct moral journey to take in the light of your wrongdoing. What do you do? Well, there's a very nice feature of Catholicism. You go to confession, brah. You say your sins aloud, and a deputized representative of Christ audibly will tell you that you're forgiven and you're absolved of your sins. Now you know. So this is not a strictly probabilistic or evidential answer. It's more like a practical answer. Suppose there's a good God, a perfect God, and you want to react to that in some way. What is more likely, or what is the more wise path to take? To invent it yourself?
Right.
To talk to some philosophers? Or to try to find some institution that has a long memory of these things and has theories about how they work and guidelines? Maybe fallible, maybe not. Depends on the guideline in view. Now, this is not an argument for Catholicism in particular yet. This is an argument for joining a tradition rather than going it by yourself. But if we really want to be good Catholic apologists, I think you know the right premises to add about what the Catholic tradition is. Its age, its claim to credibility, its size, and the sheer wisdom contained in its long list of saints and thinkers.
Yeah.
Some Catholic apologists take these arguments to be airtight. I don't. I think they're pretty good considerations that give you reason to give it a shot, to go to Mass. And what happens beyond there is up to the good Lord and to you.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And I mean, if I were to try to answer my own challenge, I think some things that I would say, one, if I'm supposing that there's a perfect being at the foundation of things, it seems pretty likely a priori that being is going to want there to be, some kind of reliable means by which humans can come into contact with, himself, itself, whatever. And so that suggests that I should have some sort of expectation that maybe there's a true religion. So that's one thing I would kind of throw out there. Another thing I would throw out is that, maybe there's I think Anselm thought this, if not, just invoking his authority boosts my own credibility here a little bit. I think he thought that there's like a kind of a priori case for like bare bones Christianity that you would just kind of expect something like Christianity to be true in order to make sense of the world of our own lives. And then third, that as you start to sort of survey the options, you're going to think it's unlikely that that the right religion is one that was invented 5 minutes ago that has 20 adherents or something. It's probably going to be old. It's probably going to be visible. It's probably going to be structured in a way that accommodates human nature, and that starts like directing you towards something a lot like Catholicism. You throw some more facts about like what seem to be the facts concerning the life of Jesus, and then maybe you're on the road. That's the general strategy that I would want to take. But as a not yet Catholic, that's what I would say. And you're not
JP.
Okay, yeah, and you're not telling me that any of that is wildly implausible, at least, which
I don't think so. I think you should follow Pascal and go to Mass and see what happens.
Well, yeah, I don't mind saying that I mean, I went to mass the other day, so that's not something that I feel to do. Okay. In closing, you write a lot about money these days, and in particular about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, about which I know very little, despite coming from a long line of stockbrokers. I don't really understand this stuff, so I can't yet ask you particularly intelligent questions about Bitcoin. But I can ask you this question, which is there a connection between all of the rich, deep thoughts that have been on display here about God and philosophy of religion and your thoughts about money? Is there a link there? Or not, and it's fine if there's not.
There might be a biographical one.
Okay.
I've often been pulled by my teaching and by what students find important. And I found surprising wisdom there. Now, of course, students don't always know what's right or what's good or what's important, and sometimes they need to be taught that, yes, this philosophical question, despite your disinterest in it, is of grave importance. But oftentimes we analytic philosophers, we academic analytic philosophers, get wrapped up in word games. We're pushing symbols around. We're playing schmess.
Mm-hmm.
We're playing a game that doesn't actually matter that much. And we get signal from our students.
Are you going on me here?
No, I'm going Dennettian. That's the schmess reference.
Okay.
Did you know this paper by Dan Dennett?
That's right. Yeah. Rings a bell now. Yeah.
So he alleges that much of analytic philosophy is like studying the rules, not of chess, but of schmess, which is a game just like chess, except the knight can move. I think it's 3 squares than 1, or it's a slightly different shape that the knight can move. And we prove theorems about schmess and so on. What a waste of time. Well, again, students are fallible guides to this, but I think they're often signal that we should pay attention to about what really matters. If you cannot convince your students to care about the problem of universals, then maybe you shouldn't care about it either. Now, here are 2 things that I've never had problems convincing my students to care about: God and money. God and money. Now, there are 2 other topics that I don't teach about that they also want to talk about, which is race and sex. Now, maybe for obvious reasons, I don't talk about those. As a white man in academia, it would not go over well for me to say anything about race and sex, so I don't.
Yes.
So I say stuff about the 2 topics I am allowed to speak about at great length, which are God and money. And I try to bring them into my classes, and they seem to me to be things that matter, and that matter more than a great deal of what we do elsewhere in analytic philosophy. So if they have anything in common, perhaps it's that. It's this thing that I've been able to detect via my teaching, a signal of something more important, which is just that this stuff, we actually care about it, and we should care about it. And it's good to think about it deeply, as philosophers do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the title of my Substack is Reflections on what matters. So since money matters, maybe I'll educate myself about Bitcoin, and we can have a future conversation about that once I know.
If you wish to educate yourself, may I submit?
Okay. There we go.
Let this be your guide. It's the best book
Okay.
that a philosopher has ever written about Bitcoin.
Yes, and I've not read it, but I'm willing to just probabilistically affirm that, and I'll link to it.
It's the only book a philosopher has written about Bitcoin, or at least an analytic philosopher.
All right. Okay, great. All right, Andrew, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you're anxious to talk about, or are there places that you would like to guide people to encounter more of your work?
No, that's great. I'm just grateful for the time. It's a great gift. Thank you, JP. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. And and like I said, I will link to resources in the description. But I'll stop recording now, and then maybe we can chat for a second. All right. Let's see. Stop recording.